The trends shaping education aren't emerging, they're already here, disrupting everything from curriculum design to credentialing to career pathways. I'm Curtis Clark, and alongside Troy Kay, we develop Catalysts for Change to profile the researchers, the leaders who are making sense of this turbulence and then translating it into actionable intelligence. Today's guest has their finger on the pulse of global education trends, identifying patterns that others are missing and asking the questions that need to be asked. If you're making decisions about the future of learning, this conversation will reshape how you're thinking about what comes next. It is an honor to introduce today's guest. Dr. Tracey Burns is Chief of Global Strategy and Research at the National Center on Education and the Economy. Previously, she was Chief of Research for the Center for Educational Research and Innovation at the OECD. She has additionally served as an expert for multiple OECD UNESCO commissions and is a member of Teach AI's advisory committee, guiding education leaders on the safe, effective, and responsible use of AI in education. Tracey, welcome to Catalysts for Change.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Tracey, I want to jump off and get us going here. And for years, you've been analyzing dozens of megatrends, from demographic shifts to AI disruption, including across multiple editions of the OECD's Trends Shaping Education. What do you feel is the most underestimated or misunderstood trend, and why?
That's a great question. And you're right, there's been hundreds of mega trends that we've looked at. And when I'm asked this question, I hesitate because it's hard to pick just one. But to answer your question, I would say rising inequality. Not because it's underestimated, it's been a headline for years, and not even because it's misunderstood, because we have papers, reports, policies, practical programs, all kinds of things that are aimed at addressing it. If we can see it so clearly and measure it so precisely and address it so concretely, why are we still unable to make real, lasting change? And on the country level, we have seen change. China and India, among others, have made huge strides, big global economic forces. But within countries, across regions, communities, urban, rural settings, between individuals, inequality is not just stubbornly persisting, it's rising. Little statistic, globally, the top 0.0001%, so fewer than 60,000 multimillionaires, own 3 times more wealth than the entire bottom half of humanity combined. In Canada, Statistics Canada data from 2025 showed that the richest 1% hold nearly 1.25 trillion in wealth, which is roughly equal to the bottom 80% combined. So financial inequality is connected. We know what it means. It's connected to not having a place to live, being able to buy food, feeling secure, safe. It intersects with health and well-being, education outcomes, later life success, and it's connected to a whole host of things. And so one of the things that we really focus on when we talk about this is not just that it exists by itself, but that it interacts with each and every single one of the hundreds of global megatrends that I've studied over the years. So when people ask me this question, I pick it always because we need to do better.
So when you say we need to do better, is that a better sort of understanding of the impact at the regional level or changing the dynamics of what that inequality is?
I think we need to change the dynamics. I think we actually have a very good understanding of what's going on. We understand also how difficult it is to shake and the way that, it's scaffolded together. So you have rising inequality across time, across lifespans, across the number of different things you have going against you. So I think we need to find a way to get beyond individual intentions. I'm not trying to say that people are not working hard at this. They really are. But very well intentioned individual efforts, and think about how do we really want to address this from a strategic, from a nation building or globally, how do we want to deal with this differently than we have been thus far?
Yeah, and I can see where the tensions of trying to figure this is this globally, is it regionally, even within countries, looking here, even in Canada, the diversity and the inequalities across the country. That strategy, which one do you pick? The regional, the global? Who is it that is going to nudge this forward in terms of an initiative to address?
I'm not going to sit here and answer that question. I think it's a real conversation we need to be having. And the answers, depending on regions and depending on nations, will not be the same. Every area will have their own particular way of dealing with it. But I think we do need to ask ourselves why we are still in this situation. Why, despite all the best intentions, despite all the efforts we've made so far, is inequality not just persisting, but increasing to rise?
Dr. Burns, you mentioned as well, like there's a few who've started down this path and have made some headway. Is there lessons to be learned from them? Is there observations that other countries can be making? Appreciating the nuance of each specific country is theirs. What could other countries be looking at or other geographies?
Yeah, and I think I'll make this my answer a little bit more focused in
Mhm.
the sense that you need to start somewhere, right? So we're here to talk about skills. We're here to talk about how do you think about how you connect education and workplace learning. And so if we start there, thinking about who's been able to do this, who's been able to really try and modernize their system or make a difference, one of the big conversations is always around Switzerland. Not because they've gotten rid of inequality, but because they have really been able to connect their education to careers and to later life success and happiness in their populations. In Switzerland, over 70% of secondary school students choose to enter programs directly related to careers. The entire system is structured to align the competencies and skills development with emerging workforce realities. And one of the things that I really want to point out is that education is not on its own, it's part of the larger economic development strategy. And so you've got national employer associations, you've got governments on all levels. It's a federal system, so federal, canton, provincial level, who are really working together concretely. Who's deciding the training content?
Mm.
Well, the employers also, they need to know what the students can,
Mhm.
when does something need to be developed? When does something need to be ended? These are the kinds of things, that granularity that you see in that system, which is really important. And more recently, one thing I would like to flag, I think which is really impressive just for the level of strategic action that you see on the level of a nation, is Singapore's future skills strategy. They have an agency that actually monitors 38 different industry sectors. That's literally, and so they're trying not to think of what will be needed in 4 years, but in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, when people are coming out of school, when they're changing careers, when they're reskilling as they age. And it's actually really impressive how they have built the infrastructure starting very young, all through the lifespan, that's actually developing not just training opportunities for individuals, but the workforce the nation needs, which is a really interesting sort of adaptability, but also foresight component. So we're seeing
Mhm.
on their side is education for careers that cross sectors, for example, based on labor market data and what they see emerging. So just as an example, 2025, there's new programs in clean energy, engineering, health, exercise coaching, paramedicine, community care. There's a very interesting set of activities that are intentional and also, as I said, strategic. I'll use that word a lot. I think that's the level of intentionality and deliberateness that you need in order to build a system that's really working well and working together.
So really, it's about breaking down those silos and recognize that they work as an ecosystem and collectively to achieve that strategy. You keep referencing strategy, but obviously, if you don't have a strategic framework, you're not going to be able to achieve those levels of integration and collaboration that are required.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And you also, just from a human perspective, right? If you're looking around corners, you need to talk to the people who know what's happening. You need that
Mhm.
expertise. But you also need to be talking to the educationalists because you need their expertise. No one can do this alone. It's inherently something that needs to be developed together and also owned together in order to function well.
Yeah. So actually, you've answered the question that I had. So Troy, why don't we step into that next question that you have around the set of skills and competencies as well?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Curtis. So I was wondering, so the latest World Economic Forum's report talks about the fastest growing skills for 2030. And so we're 4 years out from 2030 now. Taking a look at that, the top ones are unsurprisingly tech related. That makes a ton of sense. But the rest of them are things like problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, adaptability, resilience, creativity. These are all very human skills and they're like enduring human qualities, right? It's what makes us human. And those are things that you don't necessarily develop through traditional lectures, through exams. And you're showing from the work that you've done, you're showing that you develop these skills through experiential learning and inquiry driven learning and embodied learning. And so the question here for me is who out there has been actually able to make that shift in practice and how they get learners to learn that way to develop those enduring or those core essential human capabilities to be better prepared for that set of skills that are obviously required for 2030 with the advent of so much new technology.
Mm-hmm. And to add to your list of the human skills, that motivation and self-awareness are right up there too. It's great to be good at academics. And by the way, we can't forget that sometimes this conversation goes too far in the other direction where people think that it's, oh, we don't need to be able to read. But
Yeah.
that's not what we're saying here. It's that
Yeah.
it's really it's an and. And I love this question because part of the answer is that this isn't new. The conversation about AI and tech makes it new, but it's actually an old discussion. And right here in Canada, McMaster University in Hamilton pioneered the McMaster model in 1969 using problem-based learning and early clinical exposure for their medical students. So that was considered extremely innovative at the time. It was highly successful. It's expanded across the world. It was shown that it was possible, not only possible to do this, but very useful in terms of building, if we're talking about doctors, bedside manner, understanding how to and when to use professional judgment, like all the things that you have to actually learn in addition to your course content as in terms of traditional learning. If you extend it to now, what's happening now, Hong Kong, for example, uses virtual reality to train their nurses. Hong Kong Polytechnic University is doing that. Zurich University of the Applied Sciences uses virtual reality for electrician apprenticeship. So it's taking this idea of embodied learning that you need to be on the job, and it's using a technological option to bring it to more students. And I think this is a very promising combination because being able to do it that way means that it's more efficient. You're not traveling, you're not taking people. It's more cost efficient and it's more equitable. If you're rural, if you are very far away from an urban center or from a like a nursing station or whatever, you can actually have the same experience if you have access to the tech. They're applying it to younger students. And in Zurich, by the way, the students are scoring a full grade better on practical exams than those using traditional study methods. So this is that whole piece of how do we make problem-based learning and embodied learning and bring the human out is alive and well across the world. And one of the questions is like, people are like, how do you do it? How do you make sure that you do it well? And I say three sort of pieces. One is that it needs to be relevant. We talked about this previously, but you really need connection between industry and the academy. You need those partnerships. It needs to be co-designed, the standards, the materials, the assessments, the teachers, bringing industry. That it doesn't work if it's not relevant. But it also needs to be routinized. It needs to be available for everyone and embedded in a systemic way, not a special add-on that you don't really know how to use, in this case, the tech to do something. It needs to be really part of who you are and your DNA as an educator, for example. And then going right back to your earliest point, relational, that human aspect. When we're looking about who employers are trying to hire, but let's be honest, even if we're thinking about making new friends, we all like people who are skilled, motivated, resourceful, people we can trust, people who are self-aware, who are good to hang out with. So that sense of, yes, you need to be a professional. Yes, you need to have that academic knowledge, but you also need to bring the whole professional aspect to it is very human and is something that we're seeing again and again in those World Economic Forum surveys. That's what the employers are telling us.
Yeah, certainly something that even in my own career, I've noticed a shift in the types of conversations that we're having with graduates and the types of decisions that we're making based on those conversations, right? Like it's less about looking at that foundational set of skills that they've developed through post-secondary. It's more about how they show up and the stories that they tell and the enthusiasm that they express with respect to their experiences. And those are the people who we end up looking at as future leaders, people that we want to work with, to use your very human reality of just how we connect. So I've got two kids who are at the age of potentially heading into post-secondary. You've spent years looking at how technology shapes kids' physical and emotional well-being, and both the good and the challenging. And you've included that in the Education in the Digital Age book that you've got. So as a father and as a technologist as well, I can attest that that stereotype of me looking at my kids and realizing that they already have exceeded me in their aptitude for technology is very true. Digital literacy, I think, is baked in. It's cultural. We talked about, and it's probably not a favorable term anymore, but the term digital native and those types of things have been thrown around, right? It's the generation that has grown up in the space that we live in right now. And those skills are as fundamental as reading and writing. When you think about K-12, when you think about post-secondary, how are schools figuring out how to integrate emerging things like AI? And what are some of those lessons from your earlier work that you think we should be still holding on to because they are foundational lessons, irrespective of where we are in time?
Yeah. How much time did you say we had?
Yeah.
I can go on for a really long time. So
We'll have to visit this again and bring you back on as another guest just to continue this conversation.
very happy to do that. I really have a lot to say about this, but I'll try and keep it brief. I do think we do need to take a step back, right? Sometimes when you have this discussion, I get the sense that it's a little bit from the tech side, a solution in search of a problem. So I've got this super cool tool and I need to get into the system. And then people are like, why aren't people using it? But it's so cool. And so that question, you really need to turn it around. We need to say, what do our students need? What do our kids need? How can ed tech help serve that? Because as you said, we need to be realistic. We're not turning back the clock. Digital literacy is absolutely a key life skill. It's part of it. It's actually been declared a human right, access to the internet. And that sense of there is currently a bit of a backlash, and maybe we should ban things, maybe we should turn off our screens, maybe we should get away from that. I understand that instinct, but it is not wishing that we were in a different point of place in the world is not going to make it. So I think we need to be very careful to think about what is the role of school in terms of providing education to everyone and how can it really serve the mission of building digital literacy. The second point is we can't be naive. Students and young people are actually the biggest market for tech companies. They're early adopters, they're keen users, they spend a lot of time, they're willing to explore. So they're a lucrative market. And private businesses, that's their job, right? Their job is to generate more income. So there's a mismatch between what the intention is and what the goal is for education, but also parents and these private companies. And so the question is, how do we find a good middle place where we can partner together to take the best of, minimize the risks, and really build something which is strong digital literacy in our students, which includes AI literacy. So you referenced it about how your kids have passed you on the skill level. And there is really beautiful research from Sonia Livingston at London School of Economics. It used to be at around between the ages of 11 and 14. Those parents would have higher literacy skills, technical literacy skills, and then it would flip. That might be coming down a little bit given the complexity of tech and how fast it's moving. But the one thing to really remember there is you're giving this example as a parent who works in tech. Lots of people don't work in tech. When you look at that, who is able to help guide their kids when they come home, who is able to help them manage what they see online and understand how to use it and build those skills, it's a really clear set of have and have nots. This returns us to our earlier conversation about inequality.
Exactly, yeah.
Because we know who those kids are, who don't have access, who don't have the skills to manage it well, whose parents don't have the skills or the time to manage it. And you see this real perfect storm where the role of the school as being able to help build that skills and make this really resilient becomes really important. So yeah, I do have a lot to say. I've got a lot more I could say on teachers and guardrails and things, but
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
But I think it's important to recognize that this is just it has many tentacles to it, and that it's just not a simple sort of discussion. But going back to the idea of the ecosystem, there are many players in this space that will have an impact and will engage at that level of change. And I think for many of the conversations that we've been having, it is about recognizing that part of the reality, multiple players, and there is this shift in that, and we can't ignore that in any way. In fact, we'd be silly not to pay attention to that because it will just continue to build on that as an issue if we're not paying attention to it, as you say.
Yeah.
Now, that sort of leads me to the question around this broad landscape that we're looking at and the future skills development as that landscape stretches out in front of us. What's the one thing that you are excited about and that makes you want to roll up your sleeves even more than you already have to not only nudge it, but drive the change and this initiative forward?
Yeah. And excitement comes in many forms, right?
And not to narrow you into one thing, but what is
Yeah.
that one thing that right now, if we give you the moment, what are
Yeah.
you going to jump at?
So this might be a very general answer to a specific question, but it is a moment in time. This is a window of opportunity. It's also a relatively scary moment for Canada, for the world. Changing geopolitics, alliances shifting, thinking about who we are as a nation, our security, our economic opportunity, all of those really big questions are on the table. And connecting it to the skills conversation that we talked about, the inequality pieces that have been coming up, the human pieces that have been coming up, and the tech pieces. As a researcher, I am watching with interest at the energy and the sort of people showing up and wanting to do something. But I'm also watching and noticing that there is a lot of hype, a lot of false claims, a lot of fear on the table. People are afraid of the future. And so for me, that means we have to, the one thing you can do that in terms of, there's two pieces that I think we really need to think about it that I get really excited about. So one is just keeping on talking about the importance of bringing evidence to the table. These are things you can research, and we actually can know what works, what doesn't work. AI and its projections for the future of work. You can spend a lot of time, people have spent a lot of time waving your hands around that, but you can also see the most recent Burning Glass paper about it's not displacing jobs or adding new jobs. It's about combination beyond the binary, sort of making augmentation and adaptability together. We can and do have research on what works, when, for whom, how do we want to move forward to keep building skills, prepare our youth the best that we can, and our adults and our elders, by the way, lifelong learning. And the other big piece for me, and that goes back to my futures thinking hat, is we collectively can work on having a little bit more comfort with discomfort. The future is actually unknowable, obviously, right? If somebody tells you that they have a crystal ball, they do not. But what we do have and the muscles we can build are adaptability, agility, resilience, the things that those employers were saying were important, by the way,
Yep.
a systematic capacity to review, to forecast, to see around corners and get things in place so that you can make the changes necessary and pivot if things aren't working. I'm personally excited by the window of opportunity I see for change, having difficult conversations, challenging what the usual way of doing things. But I am concerned, and you've already flagged this, that we're still in many cases operating in our traditional silos. So economy is here, and security is here, and labor is over here, and education is all the way over here. Children, students, they are the citizens of the future. Education and skills are a key part of all those big conversations. And we all need a seat at that table.
Yeah, and you're so right because there is that sort of set of conversations around a narrow orientation. This is a tech play, or this is a truly economic issue. And yet, to your point, there are so many other factors that need to play into that. Or we need to ask particular questions and be critical and thoughtful, and critique the processes as well. And I sometimes fear that that conversation, or the ability or the courage to actually have those conversations, is lacking in many ways, partly for lack of knowledge, ignorance of the subject matter, or fear that you will be challenged in innovative thoughts.
Yeah. And I think in some respects too, I think the timeness that process necessitates sometimes feels daunting as well, with so many other demands that people have, right? Like to take and sit and focus on something in the right way, to ask for evidence as opposed to a TikTok and that's your opinion, right? Like those types of things are prevalent these days. And yeah, this really resonated with me too, around like messaging to my kids on what's important as they enter the workforce, making that time to have those tough conversations, to get into real good inquiry. Like those are essential skills that is a good reminder for me to reinforce for them as they head out into the world.
Yeah. So just as a final sort of question, Tracey, again, you've had a remarkable career of being able to ask these questions, be engaged in a number of organizations that truly are interested in answering or teasing out these big, audacious problems that we have. What's the next step for you in this sort of trajectory?
I think there's a few different points, and I do feel incredibly fortunate to have been a part of major institutions like the OECD, working with UNESCO, and just having those open conversations with the people from across the world, seeing the energy that they're bringing to this conversation, seeing the intentionality that they're bringing to the conversation, and the concrete ways that they're making change back at home. When they leave a big general conversation like that, they go back with fuel to then make changes that work for them in their context. And it's genuinely amazing what can be done, and the shifts that can be accomplished and have already been accomplished, like the whole nation's leapfrogging into massive economic growth from very different positions. These are old stories, but it's worth remembering, I think, in this time of discontinuity and doubt, there's a number of just phenomenal efforts that have moved the needle across multiple nations and across multiple decades. And so next step for me, I'm here to help. I'm interested in having this conversation with anyone who will listen, but I'm also interested, it's really a learning conversation, right? Every time I have one of these conversations, I'm hearing about what's working and not working, or I'm learning about new research, or there's always something new that's coming up. And I think one of the biggest things is to pitch in, to put our hands together, to dare with those audacious ideas, and to be humble as well.
Yeah.
Change is hard, right? Like it's hard to change. And if you've spent your life building something, it is not easy to be told that it's kind of time to change it. There's a strategic, audacious dare to put something forward. And then, right back to the beginning of our conversation, there's this very human conversation around convincing hearts and minds, letting people know they're appreciated. And if we do have to let something go that people have invested a lot of time in, that their work is not lost. It's been a necessary step to where we're going next. And I think some of that is where we can make a big difference as well. Not just throwing ideas out there, but making them human, and making people understand not just that they can dare, but that what they have already done to this point has been incredibly valuable.
Listen, Tracey, we've come to the time where unfortunately we have to end this conversation. I have to say, I've just been left with a general sense of hope, a general sense of the need to reflect and the need to place the human back into this conversation, our communities, our youth, all of the individuals that we engage with, but also recognize that our institutions have lots of an ability to change and will lead us in many ways. But I feel inspired by this conversation, and I truly thank you for this. And yeah, I look forward to continuing many of these conversations with you as we move into the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure. I've so many good questions and so much to say. It's a delight.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Care. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, another one.
Another set of
excellent.
incredible
Yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, my big takeaways, starting with that conversation around rising inequality as the foundational megatrend, I think set the tone pretty clearly that if we don't get that piece right, then we'll still struggle ahead with a lot of challenges. Not to downplay the fact that there's a lot of challenges already, but that one's a pretty core one. Once again, Singapore has come up. It's come up for me a few times in other conversations, but it's come up again in this conversation as an exemplary model for other countries to look at. And so there's a big takeaway
we're
there.
actually going to be speaking to one of the individuals who's led that initiative over the last number of years. So yeah, the timing is good for that one.
It's exciting. Other quick takeaways, intentionality, that's key. It creates the possibility if you are intentional. The importance of relevance, and that being an equation where industry and the academy have to get together in order to keep things relevant. And then systemic availability, right, to help address that inequality piece, at least in some respects, I think is key, apart from the foundation of just human capabilities and human skills being so essential. And some great takeaways for me and my kids. Can't beat that.
I found it really quite remarkable in terms of just reminding us of that some of the great initiatives have been in play for a number of years. The concept of McMaster's Medical School. I remember many years ago about hearing how innovative it was in terms of changing this around to work integrated learning, a different approach, even bringing in different types of students that wouldn't traditionally be eligible for other medical schools. But it was that work integrated opportunity, that learning framework that they approached very differently. Now we hear frequently around co-op, around work integrated learning, the importance of giving students those opportunities and the alignment to the industry that they're going to be working with. It's like things come around full circle, but now we're seeing it more engaged and more acceptable and actually something that we strive for. I found that to be very interesting. But I also found it quite remarkable in terms of the ability that Tracey had to reflect on different areas in different regions of what they were doing and examples of. So we're not starting from scratch. There are great examples and success stories that we need to not necessarily completely replicate, but learn from and see how we can apply them in our own regions, in our own sort of sectoral context as well. But again, the idea of asking questions, the research, how it tells the story, and that it is important to recognize that this is not just a tech play. It is a human play. It's about our communities and about how we think about learning and education and exposure. Again, very inspirational. And if these are the leaders and researchers that are helping us move down this track, I think we're moving in a very good way for sure.
Agreed. Yep. Looking forward to the next ones, as always.
Yeah, always.
This gets better and better.
Thanks so much. Take care, my friend.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.